In this video, I'm going to talk about the 472-500 Cadillac oil pump. The factory oil pump that will come on the motor is an aluminum housing, and it has this oil filter adapter. The gears are inside the pump. It's an external mounted pump with a drive rod that goes up to the distributor. These just bolt on to the outside and hold the filter. Now, in all 472-500s, it's the same oil pump. They didn't do a different oil pump. When you get into 425, 368, they were similar to these motors, and they used a different oil pump. Now, Melling makes a cast iron replacement that's basically goes right on. It's got the same angle. It's cast iron instead of aluminum. It uses the same size gear, and so it's basically a replacement pump. Now, because all the pumps use the same gear, that means the basic volume of all the pumps is the same. Now, you can port them out a little bit and get a little bit more flow out of them. Melling did do some tests back with Larry that showed that you could get upwards of 25% more flow by reducing the restriction in the casting. So that meant the gear really wasn't the limiting factor, but the holes in the casting. So you can do that to the casting and get a little bit more out of it. But the basic pump that you get from Melling is called a 58F pump, and that's just a cast iron replacement stock pump. Now, there is another pump that you can use. Sometimes, if you look at this stud, sometimes you can use the 425 pump, which uses the same gears, but if you look, the angle of the filter is substantially different. It's pointed much more towards the pulley here and more straight. So sometimes if you're mounting it in something other than a Cadillac chassis, that will help out. Now, this is called the G pump. Melling calls it a M58G. The G pump was actually 425 Cadillac. Same family, smaller displacement. Now, the gear itself is still the same gear as every other pump. They all use the same gear. But you can see, I mean, sometimes the flow is a little bit different. This has a bit of a 90 in it. But the filter angle can really help you. Now, there is one more pump, and that's the H pump. This is the M58H pump. Now, if you look, it's really basically the same as the F pump. It may be a ever so slightly different angle. Not really enough to help you. It has the same gears as everything else. The problem with this pump, and why we don't tend to use it, is it has a completely different oil passage. Now, that will go on to the flat area, but you're going to have a lot more trouble trying to get it to seal. The regular pumps just have an oil passage. This has this big old cutout, and this is meant for the 368. Now, it doesn't really gain you anything in angle, and it has a different cutout. So for the most part, we don't ever talk about the H pump because it's really not a lot of advantage to it over the other pumps. Now, on a regular motor, you probably just want to use the F pump. It is what fits the car. You know, it fits the motor. That is the standard replacement. The G pump is really more if you're having trouble trying to clear a cross member in an engine swap or something where you need to try and tuck that oil filter in a little bit further, with the G pump. And that will bring it down and maybe help you out. But that's basically it for oil pumps. Now, they're all basically the same pressure. They're all the same volume because they use the same gears. You can port them and maybe get a little more out of it. It's not going to be leaps and bounds. The only other thing you can do is this has a built-in bypass spring. Now the bypass spring will set what the pressure is when the motor is RPM'd out. At idle, you really typically don't move enough oil to be able to up the pressure, so it's not going to affect idle. But factory set pressure for a Cadillac is like 40 psi at a couple thousand RPM. If you want to increase that, you can either pull the plug and throw a little bit of a shim in, or go to maybe a Chevy spring in here so that you can get a little more pressure out of it. That's really more for racing, and it's not really going to increase the volume, it's just going to increase the pressure. So that's the basics of pumps. I mean, the real problem is we don't have a high volume pump. The gear is the same in every single pump. You can swap the gears. They sell just gear replacements because the gears are the same in all the pumps. And because the gear is the same, that's actually what sets the volume for the pump. So unless you go to an external belt-driven mounted pump of some sort, you really can't change how much oil you're going to move with any given pump. The only thing you can change is a slight angle on the filter to try and tuck it in a little bit better. And that's it. That's all there is to pumps. There really is not a lot to these pumps